Welcome to Living Indie Grind. Today I'm talking with YouTuber and game dev Tyler Green. We talk about getting views on YouTube, challenging ourselves technically, and much more. If you like what you hear, don't forget to like and subscribe, and join the Discord to suggest podcast topics. Wishlist Stolen Hearts on Steam. Let's get into it.
This is not a podcast. This is a theme song.
Welcome to Living Indie Grind. How do you do? It's Mr. Moo. And as always, we have a very special guest. Today we have Tyler Green. Tyler, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
How you doing? You want to give yourself a little intro?
Yeah, sure. I'm Tyler Green. I'm a game dev on YouTube, and I'm also a software engineer for my day job, and I really like playing games and making games.
Nice. And what are you working on right now?
So right now, I'm actually collabing. It's going to be my second collab ever with another YouTuber called Spaceboy VR. He actually only has one video, but pretty cool because he basically does virtual reality, which I've actually never done before. So it's something interesting, but we're looking at making like a Red Dead Redemption type VR, making it in like a time constraint type game. So we're starting that out now. So I think it could be pretty cool.
Yeah, you like those types of challenges where you like give yourself time constraint and then like remake a game.
It kind of gives me also like an excuse to not be as good as the real game, because if I just said something more like generic, like, oh, I'm making Mario Party, or I'm making Red Dead Redemption or GTA or something, it's like, okay, you're gonna get all these comments with people saying this isn't as good as the real game. So by saying at least I made it in a week, it's like now I have this excuse. I'm not as good as Rockstar. I only had a week, so that's why. It's not that I definitely could do it in like in a year if I had all that. Obviously not. So
Have you worked on a lot of have you worked on bigger projects before, or have you like pretty exclusively stayed in this like time constraint sphere?
Have I ever like made like a really like large game over like multiple months and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, like what's the biggest project you ever worked on?
So before I actually started YouTube, I spent like a year and a half building out a website called Deodeck, which was like a very like old school browser based card game where you could like buy cards and like you could like go to the marketplace and auction houses and like sell them and all that sort of stuff. And I had like a small community maybe of like 200 people, which is pretty cool actually. I spent a long time on that, but I kind of realized that it, like as cool as it was really hard to grow it, because a lot of people nowadays don't really care so much about just like text-based games so much, or there's still people, but it's a much smaller community, and it was really hard to get it going. And I was also like starting to experiment with Unity, and was starting to get into like actually like having like sound effects and music and like actual visual stuff, and that was starting to become my interest more. So I kind of stepped away a bit from Deodeck at the time, and I started making my YouTube channel. And since then, I've just been, I've been focusing more on my YouTube channel than that.
Is that how you decide to like make certain games? Because you're trying to promote, like, you think you'd make good content for YouTube, or is this just the stuff that you're interested in the first place?
Yeah, it's like a mixture of both, actually. It's like, I really like making original stuff too. I know on my YouTube channel, it's mainly not original stuff. There's a few that are original, but it's mainly recreating other games. I think it's a mixture of like three things. One, I think it's just, from like a YouTube perspective, at least, it's just easier to build. It's easier to get views, obviously, when you're doing a game that other people are familiar with. It's just easier to get people to watch it. Another reason is that it teaches you a lot also, which I think is a really important thing, that like, especially like if you like, or at least from my perspective, like when I make like a Nintendo game or something like that, I find that like you learn, like Nintendo's really good at making games, like clearly, and you kind of learn things when you're copying them. Like when you try to recreate stuff that they did, like for your own games, like you'll see like, oh, cool, like they put particles here. Like I maybe wouldn't have thought to like go all overboard with doing that. Or wow, look at this, like look where they have these sound effects. Or like even when I was just doing Mario Party, which was my most recent video, just like small things. Like if I had come up with the idea of Mario Party and was doing it myself, most likely I probably would have just done a very like basic like, okay, here's your number, and go walk up those things. But they do this whole fun thing where, they have this rotating dice that pops up. You hit it. It causes this whole like particle explosion with smoke. The number pops up. And then you see how many things you're going to go. And it has this whole like da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da spinning sound effect. And it really makes like a show out of something as ordinary as hitting a dice. Like it makes it kind of fun. So they're really, really good at making those like small details. And when you learn and you copy the games and you do them for yourself, it's things that I then remember because I have to go do it now for making their game. It's things that I'll take with me when I make my own games now. So it definitely helps me improve as a game dev. I feel like by copying other games that are successful games.
Oh
That
yeah,
makes sense.
I definitely feel that a lot. Like when I find myself like trying to recreate like certain elements of games or like certain
Yeah,
experiences, like you're like, okay, let me look at like a video of what the actual footage is of this game, and then when you look at it, like, yeah, there's actually so much detail that's
yeah,
put into this that it's just like you never notice it, but then as soon as you notice it, you can't not notice it, and you're like, now you need
exactly.
to add this, otherwise, like, it feels like something's missing if you don't have that type of stuff.
Exactly, and it's kind of like I don't know if you've ever seen. I don't know if it's like Claritin or something, but there's like one of those like old commercials where it's like it shows someone's like, or I don't know what it was, but it shows someone's like vision, and it looks fine, but then it shows like once they took the medication, or maybe it was contact lenses. I don't remember, but it like all of a sudden the vision clears up and it looks like 10 times better than before. But the cool thing about the commercial is before it actually clears up when it just starts, you don't really realize that anything's wrong because it's like good enough. It's not like super blurry. It's not super like grayed out. So it's just like enough where you're like, oh, it looks fine. But then once it like switches to like the more colorful, vibrant, you're like, wow, it actually looks so bad before. And it's kind of something I feel like Nintendo games are really good at, where like you can make something, oh, it looks pretty good, and then like you kind of compare it to what they did, and you're like, wow, like my thing actually sucks now comparatively. And I'm like looking at what they did. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and it's like taking those steps. Like, I feel like, especially like your games and stuff like that. Like, I was just going through all your videos, and you have a very steady progression of improvement, or at least at the very least, like technical challenges for each video that you do, which is definitely something that like makes me think that you're, like you're saying, you try to make things that will get you views online and stuff like that, but it's clear that you're also making stuff that is meant to challenge you, right, technically. Because like, first you started with 3D, right? That's like when you first recreated
yeah, Mario.
the
Yeah.
Mario, like the platformer. And then you go on to, you'd have some mirror stuff, you have some stuff that has like pathfinding, AI, right? So which of those has been the most technically challenging for you?
Yeah, it's a great question actually. I think the most technically challenging was probably the mirror one that you mentioned with that Call of Duty where I tried to do like an online. I think that was challenging in the sense that like I'd never done like a online mirror type game, even though it was like a very basic thing. I know that it could get a lot more complicated than that, but just building something out like that, just having to learn all of it was challenging for me. I will say like starting off, like my first 3D game also was pretty challenging, just understanding how 3D works and all of that. And I also have another video where I tried to get like, it was a very simple game that I made, but it was to use machine learning. So I actually used like the ML agents it's like a Python library that you could use with Unity. And that one I tried to actually teach an AI to beat me at my own game, which was pretty challenging also to like learn that, just understand how, to train like a model and get it to actually figure out how to, do things. So I'd say those three are probably like the most challenging in terms of learning like something new. I'd say, yeah, that's kind of my goal though. Always, it's always to do something a little bit different than the previous one. Whether it's it's making a bigger game like Mario Party where I tried to do more in that kind of time, or at the time like GTA was kind of the same for me, or it's trying to learn something new with like mirror or machine learning or pathfinding, like you said. So it's always to me like how can I teach myself something else or improve some way. So I'm always trying to think, how can I eventually, because my goal eventually, and I think most game devs is like, we want to make that one, that great game that like, the magnum opus type project at one point. So it's always, to me, it's like, I want to like experiment and try as many things as possible. And I could like cross them off my list or check them on my list. Like I kind of felt like after doing machine learning, like it was cool, but I don't know if I'd ever necessarily, maybe, who knows? Like, I don't know if I necessarily use it in like my like ultimate game project, but things like Mirror, maybe, it could be cool to have like an online aspect. So
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because I was looking at like your video where you were talking about like it was your kind of, I can't even describe it, but it's like it's the video where you use like you created models, right, to
yeah,
teach,
the machine learning
the
one,
machine learning one, and you kind of really gloss over the kind of the technical aspect of
technical,
what
yeah.
is required for machine learning, but it's probably so much more complex than people realize if they have never like ventured into that sphere, right? So like
Yeah, and
what was involved in actually, you know, like creating this model and
making,
like
yeah.
specifying how this model is going to learn.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I hear a lot actually. Like even with like more recent videos, like I get a lot of comments sometimes. Not a lot, but I get some comments where people will be like, "Oh, I wish you got a little more technical." Because like I get a little, but not really, to be honest. I keep it more like anyone could kind of watch it as long as you like games. And the reason I do that is I find sometimes when I have got a little more technical and a little more involved with things in like little aspects of videos, I notice like a dip in engagement, and it's I don't know. And then it becomes kind of like a so, like, do you want to be more technical and just, who cares about the audience? It's just, the audience will find you type of thing. Or do you want to keep it more entertainment? But I feel like a lot of people in, like, my life who, like, like, at least for me, like, I get a large enjoyment out of making videos for people that, I'm friends with and, like, family and that sort of stuff. And most of them, pretty much all of them, aren't technical. So, I like making videos that I feel like they could follow and understand. So, um, maybe I'd make like a second more technical channel or something like that at some point where I could make, get a bit more involved. But I'm kind of going on a rant here. But as to answer your question though about machine learning, um, I think the biggest thing, like from what I remember at least from machine learning, it was really that you had this ML agents library. Basically, there was like a Python library, and what it would do is it would create these files, but these files weren't really human readable because it's basically just it doing like a trial and error type thing. And you provided this reward system. So you actually write code for this. This part's actually in C sharp. And what you would do is you would say, in my case, it was a very simple game. It was just a ball that needed to just avoid these I don't know, like these walls basically. If it hit a wall, the game ended, and the longer you survived by passing through each wall without getting hit, you basically the longer you live. But it would get faster and faster. So the ball could only move basically left, right, or straight. So it would either go like through them or like it would have to move to the left and the right and avoid the walls. And if it hits a wall, it's over, and that's basically it. So like playing myself, I could get a score of like 40 or 50. At some point, it just became too fast, and I couldn't like avoid the walls fast enough because if you, it's it becomes very quick. You have to be really fast, and that's something that's great. Machine learning is really good at. It's if a computer's good at anything, it's good at being very technical and precise. So all you really do is you create this reward system. So you'll be like, okay, if you'll do a rate cast, if there's a wall in front of you and you hit the wall, -1 reward. If you move to the left, +1 reward. And then what it does is you run this simulation, and what it does is it runs it super fast, and it'll just run it. You just let it run like hours and hours and hours. That's the boring aspect to it. It'll just keep rerunning every time it loses, and keep rerunning and rerunning and rerunning and rerunning. And it's kind of cool because you could actually see like this super speed variation of it just training itself, because it's literally training itself. All it's really doing is it's saying, okay, I only got a score of 3 this time. Score not being the score in the game, but like the reward score. So like for each point that it got for doing something good, and minus points for doing bad stuff. And it will just keep taking the model that scored the best score. And in its own mind, its brain, it's saving this file, which is basically just training itself. So, okay, I know when there's something in front of me and I go left, I gain points. If I hit it, I lose points. I should go left every time now. And it basically starts to train itself based on every like possible condition of where a wall could be as to what it should do. And then eventually you could just load up that saved file, and it will just run itself based on that trained model, and it will do it. So it's very cool. I know I've been speaking about this for a while, but it is cool that like not just for like a silly game like this, but eventually as technology gets better, I think you're gonna start seeing it. I mean, you probably already see it, but like even things like if you play like Super Smash Brothers or a game like that, where right now it's there. I mean, I don't know exactly how their AI works, but like anyone who like is pretty good at Super Smash Brothers would tell you the best computer isn't very good because they do repetitive things. They kind of they're predictable. Like they're probably essentially just their AI is probably essentially a bunch of if statements, but
Yeah.
um, very good if statements. But like at some point you start to notice trends and patterns, and they don't really learn the AI. So if you realize, hey, if I always hit them this way and they always fall off, you could probably just keep exploiting that, and they're just going to keep dying that way. And the idea with machine learning eventually would be that if you actually had like a machine learned AI, it would adapt. It would start learning that you're doing this. It would start getting negative rewards for that, and it would start learning, okay, let's stop doing that. We're losing rewards, and the model would actually start blocking you or whatever. So I think eventually you're going to start seeing more and more of that kind of stuff in games where these AI are no longer just if statements, but they're actually machine learned models that adapt to how you play like a real person. So you're going to start seeing some very, very good AI potentially in the next like 5, 10 years, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I definitely think that's coming down the pipeline very soon. I mean, we're already seeing people, right, like super interested in, like, as software engineers. I know that that's like the hot ticket, right? Everyone
Yeah.
wants to be
Yeah.
working in AI, in machine learning, right? And then we have like indie dev people like Jonas Tyroller come on the show. All right,
Yeah.
like Willie Snell, right? That's like the whole thing about that is that it's, the villain is learning as you play, right? There's like the whole
Yeah.
premise of the game, and it seems like it's just like this big technical challenge. I think that like Jonas presented to himself, and it's like, okay, let's make this into a game, right? And I think, yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that like we are going to see a lot of machine learning integrated in games and just in general, right? Especially since like most game developers are software engineers. Like most people I've spoken to, right, when
Yeah.
on the podcast so far have been software engineers, and in my experience, software engineers love to, try to be on the forefront of machine learning
Yeah.
because that's like that's
Okay.
where everything is going to be very
Hmm.
soon. So
I
that's cool,
agree.
but then again, you're like, machine learning not going to be in this big game that
Well,
I'm gonna create.
I never say never. It's just more that like I feel like it's so like there's a lot of complexities to making really good machine learning, like training it properly for like something more advanced than just a ball moving a wall. And I don't know, maybe I feel like I'm just not like my view kind of is if I feel like I'm not good enough to do it really well, I don't kind of want to do it. So maybe I'm just saying I'm not smart or like like I just want to be like I don't know if I trust myself enough to make a really good AI, but I'm sure there's definitely some smart people out there that I'm positive can and will. So um, I'm excited to see it, and not just games, also like anything really. Like we're gonna start seeing that for music even and things like that because it really comes. It's really cool that like I find the concept of it very cool, where you could say like take like a popular song, you could just feed it like 1,000 popular songs off like the Billboard Hot 100 over the years, and it will start to find trends. It will start to realize, okay, like these chords are used the most, this rhythm is used the most, and it could actually eventually build out a song that technically would be something that people would like. So it's something interesting too. Right now it sounds horrible. I've listened to some of them and they just sound like messes, but as it gets better, I think you will start seeing songs that actually sound good, and or at least like it should be good because it's what we like. It's just all it's doing is just finding a pattern amongst 1,000 songs and like, okay, let's take this and this and throw it all together. So who knows, robots might be literally doing everything one day.
I'm convinced that that's already the case.
Yeah,
That
it's
like
true.
the top executives are just pressing a button and it's like, okay, run the simulation and see what comes out, and then you got the Ariana Grande's next hit.
Yeah, literally, it's possible.
Yeah, and the other thing about machine learning is that it's not always necessary, right? Especially for
Yeah.
games, right? There's so much creative intuition, right, that needs to go
Hmm.
behind creating a game and what makes it fun, right? And it's like, yeah, you can have some really complex model to do some AI thing, but like you need to be putting it to something that actually requires it, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I wouldn't even just say with machine learning, like anything. Like, and I'm guilty of this too. It's like, oh, I learned this really cool thing, or I found this really cool feature or this really cool Unity asset that I could add, and it's like I really want to throw it in there. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, do I actually need this? Does this make the game better, or am I just doing this because I can do this? And yeah, that's an important thing I think to also think about. Sometimes less is more. So
So
good point.
so what's your favorite thing that you've learned in the process of, I guess, since you started YouTube, and some of these challenges that you presented to yourself, and you're like, oh, this is something that I've learned, and it's also something that I'm really excited to use for future projects.
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like there's like a few things. I mean, there's like very like small things which maybe aren't like as like exciting as answers, but like just small things like post processing was something I didn't even really know about. I'm definitely not good with lighting, but I've gotten better with lighting. So smaller things like that, which really can make a huge difference. Just how something looks visually, just having ambient occlusion or having lighting that actually looks nicer and isn't like dark in some areas really could highlight a game. So things like that are things that I definitely feel like I've learned, and I always want to keep using and improving on because they just make things look better. And I think even like smaller subtle things, more so like just how to like make, just animations, making characters walk, how to present certain things, like a lot of like smaller subtle things are probably the bigger things that I'd say that I've taken away from this, just in terms of making my own game, where I'd want it to look more, just what gives something more of a polished look, I guess.
Yeah.
um so those would probably be the biggest. I like I said, potentially I'd use something like Mirror if you're looking at like a cooler, like bigger thing that I've learned. The pathfinding too is very useful and very easy actually. The Unity's built-in pathfinding. I mean, it is limited to an extent. It can't do everything, but I've used it for a few. Like when I remade the ET game, my robot game. I even used it a little bit in my GTA game, but that's pretty cool too. Like it's definitely useful because all you really do with it is you build out this thing called the nav mesh, which is just highlighting the map and picking which things are like you can't walk through and which things can an AI walk through. So you could say, okay, trees you can't walk through, the floor you can't walk through, and it's very easy. It's literally just clicking on things and selecting them, and it's really no code. And then you pick one thing as your target, so you can make the player your target or
Mm.
whatever. And it's very smart. This thing, you'll basically, if using the pathfinding, you attach it to some enemy, some object, and it will just move and rotate towards the thing, avoiding all the obstacles. And I know, at least for myself as a game dev, programming that kind of stuff is not easy. It's really not always the simplest to make an AI that could smartly avoid objects and find the optimal path towards a person, a player, or whatever. A lot of the time, it's pretty challenging, and they might be able to avoid an obstacle, but they're going to be kind of stupid, and they're going to like take this long-winded, hit the wall, come back, turn around. So like the Unity one is very smart. It'll stop right before the object, just do a quick turn and then come back. So uh, it was great for like that ET video where I remade ET, which is like the worst game ever, or sometimes considered the worst game ever. There's a few that people consider, but ET's definitely up there. And for that one, I had trees, and I wanted the SWAT guy to basically be able to run through like this whole forest of trees to try to get to ET. And if I didn't have pathfinding, that would have just been absolute misery, I think, to code something myself, just avoiding all these trees smartly. But when you watch it in the video with the pathfinding, it's really smart. It'll just like see the tree, quickly rotate around it, and just keep going. So it's a very powerful tool that's really easy to use.
Yeah, especially first anything that requires enemies, obviously, and then also
Yeah.
like in a 3D space because you're in school, right? If you study computer science, you might have learned about like all these different types of pathfinding algorithms, right?
Yeah.
And breadth first and depth first and
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
A star and all these things, right? But then once you add like a third dimension, you have to kind of apply it, and it's still possible. But then and especially software engineers, right? It's like
Yeah.
people just want to write things from scratch. At least that's my first intuition, is like to write things from scratch rather than to
Yeah.
see what actually exists in Unity. And Unity actually handles pretty much everything that you need because obviously like, you're not like pathfinding is something that is like so required for many games.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm definitely gotta start learning about some of those built-in tools like
And
pathfinding.
I know what you mean. Like it feels like a challenge sometimes as a software engineer. Like, hey, can I make this? Can I figure it out myself? So I definitely get that. But then there's also like that whole, especially when I do like those challenges where I have to do it in 1 week. I'm very pro towards let's not reinvent the wheel with those kind of things where it becomes a lot of like, okay, is there an asset for this? I mean, for like my Mario one I just did, I'm talking about that one a lot because it's like the most fresh in my head. But like I had a lava shader for one of the mini games and a water shader, and instead of sitting there and figuring out how to make a shader and doing all that, it's a lot quicker sometimes to just be like, okay, you know what? It took 3 seconds. I'll download that. Oh, here's a Mario model. I'll download that instead of making a horrible one in Blender. So,
Yeah,
in those ways, it's definitely faster. And I'd say something like 3D models for me are something where I'm not the most skilled artistically with like making 3D models and like Blender. It's something where I've learned. I didn't even know how to do it before, so I've made some models in my games before. But when it gets like more technical, like having to make like a much more like complicated, like I could do like simple things. Like I've made like Goomba before, not in this previous one, but my first one I actually made Goomba, which doesn't look as good, but whatever, it's passable. But It definitely gets pretty tough when you have to make something really complicated, at least for me, because I'm not the best at that. So I'm not always against if I could find a model online, especially for like these kind of videos, to just go ahead and use it.
Yeah. Especially like if there's no commercial use for it, then it's just like
Exactly, yeah.
that's gonna also grab like a viewer's attention, I feel like, very
Exactly. I'm
quickly.
not trying to sell it. Yeah.
So when you're making these videos, right? This is a challenge that I've had when I'm
Mhm.
making like I make games and then at the end of making the game like I'm like okay now I have to present what I made, right? But I lack kind of the steps in between of recording, like
Okay.
like is that something that you plan for and you're like okay this is a key moment that I want to record, so I'm going to record it, like screen grab this so that I have it
Yeah.
for later? Or is it something that's like first you're always recording and then you're like okay this is points that I really like? Or is it something that you kind of fake? Because that's what I do. I just fake it at the end. I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of the process, but I'm really just like, just going back and pretending like I actually recorded this. Like this is actually me creating it when really it's already been created.
That's funny. It's something I definitely struggled with more when I first started. I'd always forget to record things because I just wasn't used to it and it just felt like extra work. I mean, it still is extra work, but sometimes you're just in the zone. You're just coding and you're just writing stuff. Like I really don't have time now to remember to record this and do this and then save the video. And then I like to like categorize the videos so I could find them afterwards. And it's like this is just slowing down my whole flow. I've gotten better with it, so there are some times, like you said, where I will go back and I'll fake some things, but I'd say the majority isn't, only because some of the stuff that I'm showing is like so early on in game development. I feel like it would take me so much extra time to like go back like a week and a half and show the state that it was in back then. Like especially like if it's something where like a bug's happening and like the character's like jumping and they're flying 1,000 feet in the air or something like that. It's like that's usually when I'll start recording. I'll try to record, so I'm not always recording. I just wouldn't. I just don't have enough space to do that. Maybe if I got like an external hard drive, I just have like gigabytes and gigabytes of video. But what I do typically is it's pretty planned. Like I'll know, okay, this looks like enough of a change since my last recording that I can record the current state that I'm in. And if I ever like encounter like a funny bug, usually I can reproduce it. So I'll just record until I reproduce it again. So that's usually how I do it, at least. So like I'll kind of like have an idea in my head how I want this video to look a little bit, so I could be like, okay, like this seems like a okay. Now I just added the characters to the game. This seems like a good place to record them, just to show them being added. Okay, now I made them walk, so now I could record them walking now. So I try to record whenever I feel like I've hit some sort of milestone, even if it might be a small one, just to be able to get that footage, and then I could use it. But my videos themselves are pretty, like they're pretty structured. I think sometimes maybe you might not even realize, or maybe you do. I don't know that they're more structured than you think. Like I write out an entire script based on the footage before I even record a line of dialogue. So everything is it's just the easiest way for me to do it. So I'll have a very good idea of how I'm going to make this game, be consciously recording everything that I consider like a milestone in the game. And sometimes I'll find bugs and stuff along the way that I'll record too because I think they're funny. Put it all together, sort through all of the footage, and kind of take like rough notes of everything in what order I should show them and everything, and then write out an entire script, basically saying exactly everything, and then record the entire script and try to make it sound. And this is something I struggle with. Try to make it sound not like I'm just reading something, and that it's actually like on the fly. So if something messes up, instead of going like, oh, that didn't, like you want to be like, oh, that didn't work, or I don't know if I'm doing that well now, but you want to make it seem like almost like in the fly, like, oh, you're surprised too that wasn't working, because I really don't know another way of doing it, to be honest. I'm just not always recording with a microphone on the fly unless I like live stream the entire game development process. But
Yeah, that would not be.
That's basically how I'll do it. Then I'll go and edit the whole thing afterwards. But
So you have kind of you record all the footage, right? And then
yeah,
you get to the point where you're like, okay, now it's time to make the video. I'm done with all the
yeah.
content that I'm gonna make. Do you kind of compile the footage? You're like, oh, you take the footage that you want in the video, put that together, then record the voiceover, and then kind of
Edit it all.
you edit it all.
Yeah, and my scripts are like very, very detailed. So I used to have an old YouTube channel like 10 years ago or whatever, 8 years ago, where I used to make like, funny enough, it was like game also. It was making games also, but very much like a it was like visual effects a lot. So it was, like making Super Smash Brothers, but with kittens, and I'd take real kittens and I'd film them and then add the like in After Effects, add like the cats and all that kind of stuff, which is fun for me now because like I have like a pretty good background of using After Effects and Premiere, so I get to do some fun effects sometimes in my videos, which I like to think sometimes differentiates me from the other devlogs. I know some devlogs still have some cool effects and that kind of stuff, but I try to show myself a little bit like doing fun things like hitting the Mario block myself or things like that in my videos.
So
I
I'm
know
just
how
gonna
to do.
jump in right here
Yeah,
because
sure.
I just
Go ahead.
so because I definitely appreciate that about your videos. And one moment that I like actually laughed out loud was like you had dropped I think your laptop or something like that. And you just kicked it straight through the window.
Yeah,
Great
that's
gag.
my favorite.
I thought that was really
that was
funny.
that was my favorite effect, and that one was actually by far the most complicated effect I've done in terms of like editing. I don't know if I don't know if this for a devlog thing, a game dev thing, if I should get into like video editing too much, but for that one at least, what I did was because I actually have a Mac that I edit with, but then for that scene, I found a 3D model of a Mac online. So I just dropped nothing in the air, and I had a 3D model. I basically like tracked it falling down, had myself kicking it, and then I basically just like moved it out, like rotated it out of the window. And then what I had to do was I had to create a fake window so the glass could break. So I took a random picture of a city, put it in the background, like faded it, like fogged it a little bit. And then when the laptop went through, I made it go behind that fog, created like a glass break in the middle. So it's a pretty like fancy effect that I did there. But I agree, it's probably my favorite one that I've done.
Yeah, I mean, you really went the extra
to,
mile for that because it's like you could have delivered pretty much the same moment if you just took like I don't know, like a PNG of a computer, right? And then just
like horribly bad just for the fun of it. And that's something that works though. Like a lot of people I've seen do that, and sometimes it's actually funnier to be honest when it's just like horribly done to the point where it's just like funny. It's just like a uncropped picture of a computer just flying out, and it's funny that to be honest, like it totally works. I'm probably overdoing it, but I just really enjoy doing that because I've done it for so long. I get a kick out of like working in After Effects. It's almost like game dev for me, where it's almost like relaxing when I could just get in the zone and just start editing things. So like I just have fun doing those kind of effects. So I like to add them, and I find it makes me a little different than some of the other game dev people when I'm doing like a little bit fancier effects like that. But yeah, it's very it's very planned out the entire video. Like my scripts will actually have like the individual actions in them. Like I'll plan out what I even want to be doing associated with the dialogue lines before I start editing. So I'll know, okay, like my script would literally say when I'm saying like I got angry and destroyed my laptop, I'll actually have like then an action saying pick up the laptop, kick it out the window, and then I would say, okay, now show this clip for these 5 words. Or so it's a very very planned out. So when I'm editing, I'm literally just consulting the script and I'm looking at each part, what I want, what footage am I using, and what's it going to look like, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely obvious that like every moment of your video is very intentional, right? Because it's very tightly woven, it's very nicely put together, right? Because it's also it's like very well paced as well. It's not just I think that like my style is kind of like to record myself, right? Like I have a script, but I'm not really reading from the script necessarily. Like I look at the script and I'm like, okay, this is the kind of paragraph that I want to deliver, and then I try to speak to the camera, mess up, takes me 5 times, and then eventually I get there, right, with something I'm happy with. And then it's like I take moments of the way I record it, or like if I'm inspired to do a funny gesture, then I'll try to incorporate that. But it's not like I'm not writing that into the script, right? And it's like so for me, the script writing is a much easier process. How long does it take for you to write a script, and are you going over it multiple times?
I think something that I'll get to that in a second, but I think something that you have that's really good, where I think you're a lot better than me, is I find you like you're naturally like, you have like a very good like what's the word, like candor to you, like you're a very good speaker. So I feel like almost from your end you could sometimes like, I feel like you could come across very natural even if you're improvising, and I think like you have like a very good way of speaking. I find myself, at least, maybe I'm just a harsh critic on myself, I find sometimes I could come across like awkward or unnatural if I'm just kind of improvising and speaking on the fly. So for me, it's like really important that I have things very scripted out, and I speak very much like based on what's written down, because I feel like otherwise if I don't have that written in front of me, I'm just gonna start rambling and ranting, and I'm really not gonna know what I'm saying, and no one's gonna want to watch that. But I don't know, that's just me at least.
Yeah, I mean,
But
trust me, a lot of the footage just makes it and goes right to the trash.
I loved, which I'm assuming was planned. One of my favorite things was your little bee musical that you did, which I
Oh.
thought that was incredible. So um, I really, really like that.
Yeah, that was. I think the whole video. I made the whole game. It took me like a day and a half to make that like terrible game, and I made the art and everything. And it was just because I had this idea to make this dumb song and just sing it and to be that bee.
It was incredible. So where did you get the instrumentals for that? Like, did you make those, or was that like a free track, or?
So yeah, so it is an old song. I mean, maybe I'll get sued or something like that. Maybe someone's gonna go. But I was scouring the internet for a song about being a busy bee, and it didn't take me long to find one that I was happy with, and it just had like this old show tuney kind of tune, and then I was like, okay, this is definitely the song I'm gonna use, and it was written in like 1940 or something like that, and then I just found the karaoke version of it, put the track in the background, and then I sang that first part.
Yeah, well, that was really great, and that's something I've thought about doing myself. Even not maybe necessarily like a musical, but like I play guitar. I'm not like anything special or anything, but like I could play, and something I've thought about where like it could be fun to like incorporate some like original music or to writing some stuff at some point in a video. I'm just not exactly sure how like I don't want to do it unless I feel like it's gonna be done well. I don't know if I trust myself well to do it really well, but unless I did it like in like a joking manner where it's like intentionally not supposed to be so great. But could be cool one day to, implement. Like I've thought of even doing like a devlog where almost taking what you did to like another level where like the whole devlog itself is musical. I don't know. Like
Yeah, I've also
I
been
don't know
playing
how,
around with that idea.
it might be really hard though. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
But
for sure. Yeah, actually, so I have on my Discord, I have a
yeah.
little section that says podcast topics, and Scriptline Studios is asking about how do you make music for games. So is that something that you've ever done? I think I saw that you maybe it was like a gag for the video, but it looked like you had actually created some music, like at least some basic things for the background.
Yeah. So my second video ever was the robot game where like these robots attack you. So I did. You're right. I did do like a gag part where I got on my guitar and I started making this like funny song about like this is a game where robots attack you in a maze, and I was like singing as a joke. But I did actually end up making the music for that game. But it's nothing special. It's just, like it works, but I wouldn't say it's great. But yeah, it was just like with GarageBand with like the virtual keyboard, which I find there's a decent amount of game devs who do things like that, where even maybe if they don't have so much musical knowledge, it's not that complicated to use like a program or a website and just play a few notes on the virtual piano, and if as long as you're not like tone deaf, you could kind of hear something that sounds okay, like this is musical-ish, or this sounds good enough. And that's basically what I try to do.
Yeah, and I think that like people are ready to accept music in the background without really thinking about it too much. So
Yeah.
yeah, I've been in a similar boat where like I have made like a lot of the stuff now. I'm like, ugh, it's just a lengthy process to kind of do this while you got YouTube going. I need like the Premiere skills now, Blender and Unity and all this stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm just going to, for anything that I don't really feel like needs a whole lot of intention, right? That I'm like, I feel so strongly that I need to write the music myself, right? Then I don't do that, but I have done it before. And yeah, it was much easier than I was expecting it. And I don't have a deep musical background, but I do know kind of the basics, right? Like I kind of fake playing the piano and guitar, and like I could get by, and knowing basic chords obviously helps. So yeah, but yeah, I kind of agree that it's just like it can be really easy, but it also, like, if you want to make something good, like I feel like you need to really spend some time with it.
And then that's a good point where it's like, to me, it's kind of like music in a game sometimes is kind of like the bass in a song in a way, where it's like if you have like a bad bass like if you have a really if someone's really good at the bass, you might not even notice it. It just like flows with the song. But if you have a bad bass in a song, you're gonna notice that it's sticking out and it just doesn't sound right. And it's kind of like that with music in a game sometimes, where it's like if it's really bad the music, people will notice. But if you have really good music, I mean, maybe game devs will notice, but the average person might not even realize when they're playing like a Nintendo game like how good that music is. They
Mm.
might just like it just like adds to the ambiance and it just like makes the whole thing feel more alive and great. But they may not be consciously aware of like, wow, this is a great track. Maybe after a while, if they played it enough, it gets stuck in their head. But I think a lot of the time when they first start playing, they're not like thinking to themselves, "Wow, like this is such an incredible musical track." It's just more like, "Wow, this whole world feels so like amazing," and they may not even realize that it's partially the music that's creating that. But if it had been bad music, it might have just made like the whole experience just not feel as good. So. That's something I think about a lot. Like, I mean, like a lot of people, like Ocarina of Time is one of my favorite games, Zelda Ocarina of Time, and uh, they just have like or maybe it's a nostalgia factor too, but I just love like all the music in the game, and I find like even though N64 graphics aren't really up to the same par as graphics today, but the music like like builds those worlds so well together that when you're like on Hyrule Field or you're in Zora's domain or whatever like that, it really like that music really creates such an ambiance that it makes everything feel more alive.
Yeah, and music will definitely just like set the tone, right? Like whether
Yeah,
it's good
exactly.
or it's bad, right? If it needs the right, flavor. It needs the right kind of genre for what your emotional value for what you're trying to deliver. And it's like when I'm trying to put like background music for a game, I care less about how good it is, like I'm not like sitting there like, oh, this melody is just incredible. It's just like
Yeah.
it doesn't have the right first like kind of instruments, right? Is it like a chip tune, or is it like this or that, or is it exciting, or things like that? And for me it's less has less to do with like, yeah, the quality of it.
I agree. I think, and that's a good point too. It's like the instruments really make a difference if you're, if you're, and if you look at like a lot of like games like where they have different levels based in different places, like the style of the music really makes a difference. Like you might hear different instruments if you're in some sort of like lava world where it's like hot and magma and everything like that, versus if you're in some like water world and it might sound more ethereal, the music in the water. So and like everything from like the reverb to the type of instruments that they use, and it really makes a huge difference in the feel and the ambiance. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And how do you, so kind of on a similar thread, right?
Yeah.
One thing that you also clearly put a lot of intention to your videos, which is, I mean, all aspect of your videos, honestly, but
Oh, thanks.
music and the sound design of the videos
Yeah.
themselves, right? Obviously play a really big part. So how do you decide first what kind of music, where do you get your music from? And
Yeah.
like, do you have a similar type of uh, planning when it comes to the script as you do with your sound design?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sound design, it's to me is a lot of the time like I'll like do sound design. I guess starting even earlier from the game perspective when I'm actually like developing the games themselves. Um, like whenever I'm developing a game, there's certain sound effects. I already have kind of built up a bit of a library just from other games. So like I'll just kind of look through that library first, see if there's anything I could use. Because whenever I find a good sound, I'll save it and then I'll just keep it for future ones. But I see basically, is there a good sound that I could use that would make this game that would work for it? If not, I'll just go on like this crazy search looking for them. And when I'm actually making the videos, I'll use as many of the sounds from the game that I can, or like recorded footage from the game, so like I don't have to like redo all that sound design. But yeah, there's a lot of sound design that I end up adding anyway, just because earlier footage didn't have the sound design yet, so I kind of need to go back and re-add it like in Premiere in the timeline, or just like my own stuff when I'm doing my effects. Those obviously need to have sound design and fun little things too. You might have like an audience applauding. You might have like confetti explosions. Like I have a bunch of like these like swishes. I use swishes way too much. If you ever watch one of my videos, it'll probably drive you crazy if you actually pay attention to how many swish sounds I use. I don't know, but like pretty much. But it really adds something. I don't know. Maybe I overdo it, but like a lot of the transitions, like if you just have like a transition of something like zooming into something else, if it's just silent, it doesn't have that same effect as like a,
Yeah.
So um, I find I have a whole swish library. I have like 100 swishes. I just like look through all the swishes.
Where do you
Um,
get them from?
The swishes, I've had those. I don't even know where I got them from. I've had so that actually carried over from my old YouTube. I've had those for like 10 years. Those sound effects, those swishes. I got them somewhere like 10 years ago, but I used to use them for my old YouTube channel. For like the other sounds, like the games in like the library that I built, I literally just look online for like free sound effects, and I'll sometimes I'll search for like 30 minutes, 40 minutes for like a sound effect. There are some where I've made them myself also, but I know a lot of game devs like to make their own sound effects. Uh, which is great. There are some, not that many. Like I'll do it if I think I'm capable of doing it. Like sometimes I don't really trust myself to make like a explosion sound effect. Like I'll just be like, okay, there's like enough free ones online. I could just get a free one. But like some people are like nuts to, well, not nuts, but like, very like dedicated where like they'll actually like do this whole thing and make a sound effect for an explosion, and like they'll pop a balloon and they'll get something else and they'll like layer it. And I mean, that's great that they're able to do that. I don't know if I trust myself, or maybe I'm just lazy and I'd rather just find one online in 10 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not necessary for anyone to be doing that, but it goes to this classic game dev trait of needing to do everything yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's something. So, I did one game dev jam, like a game jam for one of my videos where we made this rhythm based night game. I did it with another YouTuber called Tutmo, really really cool YouTuber. Um, and when we made this whole game. We did everything from scratch. So he actually made all the sound effects from scratch for the game. Like he was getting like his hangers out and like making sound effects, and it sounded really good. And his wife, she helped us with making the models because she's actually really talented at making 3D models, and at least I'm not so great. So she was able to make some really nice 3D models for us, and then we did like a majority of the programming and stuff. So like even the music we like he had made. So like we really um, everything we made was completely from scratch for that entire game, which was very cool. It's the only game I've ever made where uh, everything is like 100% ours in the game, which is really cool. But yeah, it was really cool to see like how he was making some of those sound effects, and there is a pride factor knowing like, hey, you know what, like when you play this game everything is like 100% ours. There's even from the music to the sound effects to the code to the models, everything is we made for this game jam. So I think that was pretty cool.
Yeah, something very very satisfying about that. So
Yeah.
definitely a trait that I have as well, of like having that desire to do everything yourself, because like you create this like perfect little gem that's yours, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you were kind of alluding to it before that like your dream, at least where it is on the timeline, I don't know, but is to have this big game that it's like, okay, this game is going to be like a full game, and it's going to deliver this full experience, and it's going to be something
Yeah.
that you're going to love to make. Do you have ideas of what that's going to be for you?
Like vague ideas. I haven't like because I still feel like I'm not at a point yet where I feel confident enough to because I just know how big a project it would be that I want to really make sure that when I start it, I really feel like I'm the best that I possibly can be. And I know people could argue, well, you'll learn along the way, but then it's also like I'm having a really good time like making these videos and these shorter games right now, so it's not like something where I'm in immediate rush to do it. I'd say pretty much every game that I've ever met, I feel like, or the vast majority have this dream of making their big game. From my end, it's not really like a specific idea. It's more like like there's certain themes that I really like. I'm really into space. I really find things with outer space is interesting. So I could see that potentially being a game. I'm not exactly sure what, but I really do like the idea of exploring planets, being able to travel through space. It would just have to be fun. I wouldn't want it to be like a No Man's Sky ripoff or something like that. So
Mm.
it's something where if it's going to be done, I want to make sure that it's like actually like a really unique original idea. That's one. I'm also really into like which I think a lot of people are like kind of like that more like medieval sword type games also. My problem with that also it's just been done so many times that like I want to feel like if I'm doing something, it at least has something unique and original to it. I don't want to just make another Zelda clone or Skyrim clone or something like that if I'm going to do something original or just some. And I see a lot of game devs kind of fall into that where like they kind of just try their dream is just to make like that RPG, and I mean it's great, go for it, but it's so saturated the market that if you're not doing anything like super original with the RPG and you're just doing the typical like I'm a sword and I could learn my spells and I could go find these chests and the loot and everything. It's like I'm sure it could still be a very fun game, but it kind of comes down to unless you're like unbelievable and you're the best ever. When there's a million other games like that, why would someone like that doesn't know you, like maybe not your family or friends, but someone else, like why would they pick yours versus someone else? If you're just making it for fun and for free, that's one thing. But if you're actually like thinking of actually selling this one day, then you have to consider these factors. Why would someone pay $10 or whatever for my game versus some other game? So
Mm-hmm.
for me, it would have to be like, okay, I feel like this is different enough, this is original enough, where people would like. To me, the perfect example of like a great game where like the right scale, where I could like see myself doing something like that would be like, well, there's a few. Like I think even though like Portal's a team, it's like that concept is really cool. It's a simple concept. It's the idea of portals and you're solving these puzzles, and they executed it amazing. But the concept was like very unique at the time, at least to my knowledge, and like what a cool concept. But it's not overly complicated. Like I know they evolve as a team, but it really could have been made by one person over multiple years. It's not horribly complicated in the sense where it's just it's really the idea that really holds the game together. It's this really cool concept of making these portals, and I think like if you could come up with an idea like that, that to me would be something like, okay, like maybe this is what I want to work on, where
Mm-hmm.
this is like this really unique cool concept, people will find this fun, and it's not like this massive scale, because realistically, unless like I'm not going to make a Skyrim by myself. It's just not, even if you give me 20 years, I'm just not going to be able to reach that scale. So even with two or three other people. So it just becomes like, if I'm gonna make a game, I want it to be really good, but I'd want it to be within a reason where like within like a size that I think it could actually be achieved,
Right.
like well. So yeah, those are kind of like the things I need to keep in mind.
Yeah. Do you have like some of those ideas floating around in your mind that's like, oh, I should experiment with this kind of idea, or is it kind of, it's still like you're waiting for it to come to you?
Yeah, more of the sec. Like I've had ideas and like I have ideas for games, but like none of them have ever like hit me enough where I'm like I need to make this as like a large game. It's more like, okay, this is pretty cool. Like maybe it could do well, but like I'll hold on to this. I'll see if something better comes along, which maybe is a bad mentality. Maybe you'll just always think that way, and you'll never really have that like amazing idea until you just start kind of building it. But eventually, I'll just do it regardless. At some point, I'll just be like, you know what, I'm just gonna go ahead and try it out. But yeah, I haven't really had like that like eureka moment where it's like, okay, like oh, I came up with this concept of like portals and jumping through them and solving these puzzles with blocks, and and I think to myself, how can I make a portal type game? And no one's ever done this before, and I'm like, okay, this needs to be done. Like I don't think I've ever had like such like a strong reaction to an idea where it's like this is the idea. I've just had things where I've written them down and I'm like, okay, this could be cool. This sounds interesting, but um, it's not like an immediate rush for me to start working on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly a massive challenge, right? To just like come up with
Yeah,
something original. And it's also because you don't even know what is out, right? It's impossible to know all the
yeah,
games that are out there, right? So to
exactly.
know if your idea is original is just like impossible from the start.
Which brings up a good point though, where it's kind of like it's very very hard to come up with a truly original idea, and it's kind of like at some point, if you've never heard of the idea, then maybe it doesn't really matter if it exists out there because like if you've done like at least preliminary research and checked and you can't really find anything, like maybe there is a game out there, but if there's a game out there where they took your idea and they didn't do it very well and they got 5 downloads, it's kind of like, should that stop you from doing it? It's kind of like maybe just because someone didn't execute it properly and someone else had the idea, maybe it's not such a bad thing. Maybe now it's your opportunity to do it properly and actually do that. Obviously if the game's really popular, like it's not worth doing probably, but if just because someone else has done it, if they haven't done it well, like I'm not necessarily against doing it properly. So
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that in my opinion, even if it's something that's similar to something else, right? If it's like
mm,
inspired
that's
by
yeah, that's a
something,
good point.
that's not the same as like you like just like ripping it off, right? Like if you take
Yeah,
Portal, right? Like
mm,
Portal is half of the reason I think Portal is so popular is because of the mechanic, right? And the puzzles are done so well. But
yeah,
it's also just like very kind of immersive universe, very appealing universe.
yeah. It's a good
Lots
point.
of like memeable moments from the whole game, and right, they kind of lean heavy into that, and right, like I know that, like, you know, taking, if you just start like making something, especially if you're kind of taking the path that's like, I'm gonna make everything myself, right, you're going to make something original regardless of what, you know, regardless if you're trying to or not, right, because you made it, right, and it's going to be like part of you that's in there.
That's a really good point, and yeah, I agree. Like sometimes even if you have an idea that's similar to something else, just by you doing it, you might come up with your own original stories and characters, and that might add the originality. So even if your gameplay is similar to something else, you're still gonna get like that uniqueness, which I think is a good point. And like I would never say to like don't make a game. Like if you're really inspired by a game, you should just go for it. Like even if there's other people that have done it. Like I don't want to come across as like this pessimistic person. I was just thinking more in my head. Like for me to feel motivated enough to do something, I want to kind of feel like the idea is unique enough, you know, just because I've seen so many. But you're totally right. Like as you're building it out, you can get these unique characters and stuff, which could differentiate you. A good example that I was thinking about when you said that was Stardew Valley, where I think it's very inspired by Harvest Moon, and but it's different enough throughout the development. You know, it's one dev also, Stardew Valley and Concerned Ape, and you know he made it. He clearly like changed enough over time that it's become its own game. It's still a farming game, but and there's lots of farming games, but he's built such like a good world with characters and music and all that sort of stuff that people love the game. So it does work if you do it really well and you do a good job at it. But it's obviously you have more work cut out for you if other people have done that kind of game.
Yeah. Then you have to like you make sure that your take on it is, yeah, like different enough.
Yeah, exactly.
So what is your kind of, besides making like this larger game, right? Like how do you see your indie game dev career going, like, you know, going forward, or like, you know, what are you hoping for? What do you think is like a realistic kind of projection?
Yeah, realistic to me would be a million subscribers next week. No, I'm kidding. But I think for me, my goal would be to like it's a mix of things. I think eventually I would like to start working on, you know, a larger game, get that out there, or start making devlogs for that. But in the more near future, probably in the next, you know, year or so, who knows? I might change my mind in a few months, but at least I see myself trying to build up my YouTube channel more. And I would like to throw, like as I've been doing, throwing a few original games here and there, but primarily focused on, you know, remaking or doing things like Pokemon, but it's 3D, or like Pokemon Red Blue, but it's 3D, like what I had done there, like those kind of games slash, you know, those challenges of making games in a week or whatever. But those help me build up my audience more because it's easier to get views with them, and then it's easier to get subscribers. And I'd like to have a substantial subscriber base. I guess I don't really know what substantial would be, but whatever, some sort of amount where I feel like if I start putting out original devlogs to a game that is like an original game, I want to feel like, okay, I have enough of an audience now that will like watch it and that will come to this because I've already built them up, that they'll be able to like provide me feedback along the way while I'm making this game. And I think that's something that I kind of always have in mind with my YouTube channel. It's harder to bring in, some people do it, but it's harder to bring in people to an original game than to, you know, known games. And then, but the people that hopefully join will stick around and will keep watching any videos you put out. That's the idea, at least of a subscriber. So my goal is, you know, if you get like a few thousand subscribers or more even through these kind of things, hopefully a majority of them then watch an original game and then they'll leave comments and then they could actually provide you feedback. So rather than if I just started with the original game with the devlogs and I had like 3 people commenting, hopefully you could get like 100 or so or more commenting, and you could actually get, if you have that audience already built out, you could actually start getting feedback on your game while you're building it out. So you'll have an idea of people like what you're actually doing while you're making this bigger game.
Yeah. And it's also like having those subscribers, right, and having like a bigger audience, right, like hopefully, you know, becoming like a big game dev YouTuber will be able to fund your you know, like your ability to work on games without actually having anything released,
like a job, like a full-time job.
So
and that's a great point. I know like every game dev YouTuber basically talks about Danny, so I feel like kind of cliche in talking about him. But like, you know, I mean with Carlson and all that, where I mean look what he's doing right now. I mean I'm not sure if he's in school or not, but regardless, it's like, you know, he's clearly probably making enough money that he could like through his devlogs, I'm assuming, to like actually be able to fund working on Carlson, and he's built at such, regardless, even if he's not, he's built at such an audience now. Like it's what, like the 14th or whatever most wish listed on Steam. So it becomes something where it's like, regardless of what he does, even if Carlson sucks, which I don't think it will, but he has such an audience build out right now that he'll get people to buy the game no matter what. Even, and he's gonna have this initial sale. Like Muck, the free game he made, what does it have? Like 3 million downloads or 2 million, like something crazy. So it's like, I know it's free, but it still shows something that it's such an insane amount of people that downloaded this that if he makes a game for $10 or whatever he's gonna charge for it, even if he sells 100,000 downloads, which is still a ton, but by his scale, not really that much. What's 100,000 times 10? That's $1 million. So it's like, I know they'll take a cut and whatever, but even if making a few $100,000 at like the very minimum from your first game is crazy, like your first commercial game. So he basically set himself up in a position where, one, he's always getting feedback on devlogs that he releases, so he knows from millions of people how he's doing, and two, he basically has a built-in audience now that will buy his game, whatever he does when he makes it, and probably future games. To me, unless he really messes something up, like, he should easily make over $1 million just by selling like a few games from his audience.
Yeah, that's a given. I cannot possibly imagine that ever being,
which is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, and Danny has, like, he went the route that's like YouTube first, YouTube forward.
Yeah.
I feel, right, and it's just like views forward, audience forward, right, and that gave him like this following that's just like he's an entertainer almost more than he is like a game dev. Like, obviously it's like just based on his game dev stuff, but it's like that's where his pull is, and that obviously has a much wider appeal than devlogs that are just about exclusively about game development with that, like, with little entertainment value, which is that's a hard balance to strike. I feel it's like especially since a lot when you're really working on something, and you want to display it, right, after working on it for so long. You want to describe what it's actually like to make this game and like the technical challenges and stuff like that, but odds are it's just not entertaining for a wider audience.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's something where he has that ability, and that's something I'd like to have. Maybe not to his scale, but I mean that'd be amazing. But even to a smaller scale, where like I could feed off these people when I'm making these devlogs, and they could kind of, I'll have a good. The worst thing I could think of is spending like 3 years making a game in isolation, and then putting it out there, and no one cares for it. So
that's what's
it's nice. But like if you're having these constant devlogs and you're having this audience following it along, you'll at least kind of know early on, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I don't like this direction, and maybe this isn't good. I mean, this kind of happened to me with Deodeck in a way, where I built, like I was saying, a website that I built out. I spent over a year in isolation just building it out on my own before I released it to people. And there's definitely people who liked it. Like I said, I had about 200 people on it at one point. But at the end of the day, I think if I had been getting feedback along the way, I probably would have changed things. I probably would have realized early on people don't care so much about these text-based games, and these things like Neopets and stuff like that are kind of dying. And people don't really care about that so much anymore. There's people, but it's a very niche niche. I don't know how to pronounce that, but whatever. There's a very small audience of people that care about that sort of thing. So it's something where I think it's important to get feedback as you're going, and not just feedback from like your mom or whatever, but from ideally other people who actually play games, or like your kind of game that you're building out. Because if you were to talk to like some of my friends, like I said, none of my friends are game dev people, and like a lot of them don't even play games except for like Madden or like the sports games. Mm-hmm. And if I were to go to them and like present to them like one of my favorite games, like if I were to show them like Skyrim or something like that, like there's a good chance like they would play it and they'd be like, yeah, this isn't for me. And if I were only using them as my audience, I would think I was making a horrible game, which clearly isn't the case, because I mean they've made that game for like every console ever. But it's interesting where you kind of need to find your people to, like, as you're building it out, that people that will be interested, but it's also important that the people that you're finding, and this is where YouTube's good because they're more anonymous, so they're not necessarily scared to dislike you or tell you things, as I've experienced. But like, you want people who are willing to also like tell you their feedback. Like, you don't necessarily want someone either who's just going to be like a yes man. It's like, oh, this is great, this is amazing. Because let's be honest, it doesn't really help, and it's something I see a lot on YouTube, and I'm definitely guilty of it sometimes too. Like, if I see a game dev YouTuber I don't know as well as much, I don't want to start like ripping into their game or anything and just being like this horrible person. But at the same time, it's kind of like constructive feedback is always useful, even if you don't agree with it. I think it's always like, I'd rather 9 out of 10 times someone tells me something they didn't like about the game than just giving me some generic, oh, this is great, nice job. And I mean, I appreciate it if that's how they genuinely feel. That's great. Like, I'm happy that they love it, but I'd rather that they just tell me like, you know what, like, I like this, but I didn't love this part of the game, or or even something small. This text was hard to read. I didn't love how this looked, and I mean, that's stuff I could actually use and make my game better, while telling me, great, nice job. I appreciate it. And if that's how you genuinely feel, then that's great. But if you're trying to just be nice, you're actually not being that nice, because you're actually hurting me in the long run by not giving me any feedback. So
yeah, all great points. I don't want to go too much longer because
I
don't want to take too much of your time. But I mean, this was great. I completely agree with that sentiment, that like it's more important to get constructive feedback than to just hear that you're doing well, unless that's just what you need at the time. Unless you're just doing it for fun, then it's not necessary.
Yeah, and which is true too. Sometimes people don't really care about making an amazing game. They just want to just having fun, and they just want to hear people say they like it. And I mean, that's fine too. I'm just speaking like from my behalf. If I wanted to make like an actual like commercial game,
Yeah, for sure. Tyler, thanks so much for being on. Go subscribe to Tyler. He's got great videos. Is there going to be a sneak preview of what's coming out next? Well, you kind of alluded to it.
Yeah, so it was Red Dead Redemption. I mean, I think we're actually having a meeting later today to start developing it, so there is no sneak preview yet. But on my Discord, I sometimes post dev progress updates. So if you're interested, you could join my Discord and you could see those dev progress updates. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. Been great talking with you.
Yeah, this was great.
All right,
cool.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
See you next time.